Everybody. Good afternoon. I'm just going to open up with a few comments about the omnibus spending bill that is now before Congress. The bipartisan appropriations bill provides our department with necessary funding for critical investments in modernization, an increase in pay and benefits for our 3 million service members and civilians, continued training, equipment maintenance, and funding that supports military operations in Afghanistan. As Congress has debated the defense budget, Secretary Hagel has worked to provide members hard facts and analysis about sequestration's impact on the department and our ability to carry out missions around the world. Preserving our readiness has been his number one priority. The additional funds in the omnibus bill above sequestration levels will certainly help us ensure that our troops can do what they join the force to do. It doesn't solve every problem, but it does give us a measure of stability. Last week, Secretary Hagel visited Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas, to visit with our wounded warriors. There he met Victor Rivera, a medically retired Army sergeant wounded in Iraq in 2007, who continues to receive rehabilitation care there at the Center for the Intrepid. Sergeant Rivera is one of the young medically retired service members who would have been subject to the so-called COLA-1 provision within the Bipartisan Budget Act. The Secretary is pleased that the bipartisan spending package includes a fix that will exempt medically retired personnel like Sergeant Rivera from a slower rate of growth of pension payments during their working years. Secretary Hagel personally met with many members of Congress to ensure that this fix was implemented as soon as possible, and he's grateful for the result. He is looking forward to working with Congress on a comprehensive approach to pay and benefits that addresses growing imbalances in our military. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the Defense Department will continue to face some tough decisions about the future of our force. We are still absorbing nearly $30 billion over the next 10 years that were not accounted for in the presidential budget submission. While the Bipartisan Budget Act provides funding for fiscal year 15 above sequestration levels, it will still be $40 billion less than projected last year. And without further compromise, sequestration will remain the law of the land for the next decade. Today, Secretary Hagel met with the combatant commanders, service chiefs, service secretaries, and senior leaders of the department to continue discussions on the fiscal year 15 budget submission the department is preparing to submit later this year. The meeting also included a healthy discussion of the quadrennial defense review that's currently underway. This is the fifth time over the past year that Secretary Hagel has gathered the full senior leadership team. He relies on this format to seek views of both defense policymakers and commanders in the field and the toughest issues that are facing our future. The Secretary was also pleased to welcome Secretary Kerry as well this morning, who came to speak to the group and offered his perspectives on the global challenges confronting both the Department of State and the Department of Defense. With this senior leadership council behind them, Secretary Hagel and the service secretaries will now turn to finalizing the DOD budget plan for fiscal year 15. We'll continue to keep you up to speed on that process as it develops. And with that, I'll take your questions. Bob? Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry. Before I do that, I did have some updates for you. I know you all were tracking the Air Force issue yesterday. We had the Secretary of the Air Force and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force in here to talk about an issue with a cheating on a proficiency exam that they were giving, that they were dealing with yesterday. And as you know, they briefed that they were retesting the whole ICBM crew force. As of I can give you some stats as of 7:30 last night. So completing yesterday's testing. So as of last night, 277 out of a total of 497 ICBM crew had taken the test. That equates to just over 55% of the force. 96% of them passed. There were a total of 11 failures. This pass-fail rate is in line with historical averages. For those 11 who failed, they'll be retrained and returned to duty following a second retest. 186 are still scheduled to complete their test by the end of business today, so we don't have the results from today's testing. And those remaining 34 that were implicated in this investigation into the cheating are on leave or temporary duty, and they'll be tested on their return. So with that, I'm sorry. I'll take your questions now.
Actually, on that same subject, I was just going to ask you for have there been any additional discovery of any additional people involved? Or has the Secretary spoken to anybody else in the Air Force about fixing the problem or addressing the problem, or is he going to have any personal involvement?
I've not heard of any changes in the numbers, Bob, from yesterday. I would refer you to the Air Force for any more developments on that. The Secretary did meet personally with Secretary James yesterday morning before she came out and talked to you, and we put a statement out after that. He intends to follow this issue very, very closely. He considers this absolutely critical. The vitality, the health and the security and effectiveness of the nuclear mission absolutely vital to him, and he's going to follow this very, very closely. And he made that clear. And he told Secretary James that he's going to expect regular updates.
Just to clarify, did you say that the 34 officers involved in the cheating scandal will be allowed to rejoin the force after retraining?
They'll be tested upon their return. They're on leave now pending the investigation. Joe.
Different topic on Egypt. Could you tell us how the Pentagon assessed the referendum over the last 2 days in Egypt? Does Secretary Hagel still consider the referendum as transparent? As you may know, the Muslim Brotherhood has boycotted the process, and more than 400 have been arrested. So
we're still assessing the results of the referendum, as is our colleagues in the State Department. So I couldn't give you an assessment right now. I mean, we're still looking at how it went. We know that that there was significant voter turnout, but I mean, it's really difficult to tell right now. It just finished. But you're right. He has talked to his counterpart in Egypt, Minister Al-Sisi, upwards of 30 times. And on this last phone conversation they had just over the weekend, and again, you saw my readout statement, he stressed our strong desire that this be inclusive, transparent, free, fair. But again, I don't have an assessment for you today.
Can you give us an update on Sergeant Bo Bergdahl? What is his condition based on this new video? And what has the department done in the last 5 years to try and rescue him?
Well, as you know, there have been media reports that there has been a new proof of life video. I can confirm that is in fact the case. We are aware of a new proof of life video. We believe it was shot recently. And without getting into too much detail, I mean, clearly, Bo Bergdahl and him being in captivity for so long. I mean, I'm told that he does look frail, and probably not in the best health he's ever known. But I can also, to your second question, without getting into details, I can tell you across the spectrum, diplomatically, militarily, even from an intelligence perspective, we've never lost focus on Bo Bergdahl and on trying to get him home. I want to also take a moment just to commend his family for their bravery and their courage, their stoicism. I've seen their statements yesterday. An incredibly brave family. One of the first things Secretary Hagel did when he took office was to talk to them within his first month of being here. And I would just tell you, Bo's not just part of the Bergdahl family. He's part of the military family, and we've never lost focus on trying to get him back.
And what impact, if you don't get a bilateral security agreement with the Afghans, will it have on your ability to eventually bring him home alive?
I don't know that I can answer that. I don't think we're linking the bilateral security agreement to our desire to get Bo Bergdahl home. That's never going to change. But on the BSA, we clearly want one, and we want one as soon as possible.
On the BSA, do you worry that the Gates book, and particularly his words about Obama's relationship with Karzai, not particularly liking Karzai, will complicate your efforts to get a BSA signed?
I think our focus on the BSA is simply getting it signed as soon as possible, and we made that clear. We need it signed promptly, or planning will have to begin for a complete withdrawal by the end of 2014. I'm not going to speculate about what language is in Mr. Gates' book and what effect that might have on the bilateral security agreement. We've been very open and transparent and clear with the Karzai administration about the contents of it. We've worked together very hard there in Kabul with him and his team on this, and we really urge him to sign it as soon as possible.
Do you want to offer the Pentagon's official review of the book? He's in the basement signing copies right now. So obviously there's some acceptance of the book. What do you?
The fact that he's signing the book in the Pentagon isn't doesn't connote endorsement of the content of the book. I've not read the book. I've just seen the press reporting of it. Look, I mean, we all have great respect and admiration for Secretary Gates. I got to watch him up close as Admiral Mullen's spokesman. All of us have great regard for him and his leadership here, and we're glad to welcome him here into the Pentagon to sign copies of it for the folks that work here.
What's Secretary Hagel's response to the book? Should he have been revealing conversations with the sitting president?
The Secretary's not taken a position on the content of Secretary Gates's book. He had a chance to meet with Secretary Gates this morning, early this afternoon before the book signing. Secretary Gates came in and had a nice chat, but he's not going to take a position on the opinions that are expressed in the book or make a statement about whether the book should have been written or not. I think he said it very well, I think, to a question that John asked him last week, and his answer was he doesn't second guess the motivations of others.
What did they talk about?
I didn't get a full readout from him. He honestly just hit me up in the hallway, said, "Hey, I just met with him. It was a great conversation, but we didn't have a chance to talk." Tom.
On budget and QDR, was the senior leader session the Secretary hosted on a work in progress, or are both of those things more or less done? And so it was the senior leaders sort of coming to grips with both QDR and budget. And if it is done, is QDR going to be skimmer plus, or is there some fresh thinking in it?
Not done. Either neither document is completely done yet, Tom. So this was very much a working discussion about the contents, both of the Quadrennial Defense Review and the fiscal year 15 budget. And the Secretary, in fact, one of the reasons he holds those senior leadership councils is to get those opinions, to have a frank and honest discussion. And having just come from the meeting myself, I can tell you it was very frank and honest and open, and he values those opinions. But no, neither document is done. Yes, sir. Awesome. I'm sorry.
There was a report this morning back on the omnibus bill about a secret annex that governs the authority over the use of drones moving from CIA to the Defense Department. Is that your understanding, that it would prohibit that move? And can you give us an update generally about the President's wish from last year at his National Defense University speech to move more of that authority to this department from the CIA?
Yeah, without talking about specific provisions that may or may not be in the omnibus bill on an issue like that. I think the President, when he spoke it into you, was very clear about his desire to be as transparent as possible with respect to those operations. And that's a message that we got loud and clear here in the Pentagon. I'm not going to get into the details in that story, just to tell you that like we are with most of our operations, or as many operations as possible, we try to be as transparent as we can.
On Somalia, U.S. personnel there, can you discuss what their role is, their numbers, whether you expect that number to grow, and what you're doing to ensure their security?
You're talking about the coordination center. Small numbers. I'm not going to get into specifics. A very small number of U.S. personnel. They'll be there on a rotational basis right now, I think just a few months at a time. They're being detailed there from the Combined Joint Task Force there in the Horn of Africa in Djibouti. I think that rotational arrangement will be the one that persists for quite some time. And they're helping with logistical planning, some operational planning, maybe some communications assistance, that kind of thing. But this is something that is important to General Rodriguez and the Joint Task Force commander there in Djibouti, and I think it's a good thing, and it helps us contribute to what is a growing international commitment in Somalia.
And what can you tell us about security arrangements for them?
Well, we don't talk about the specifics on force protection. I can just tell you we're comfortable that, and we're always watching that wherever our troops are, but we're comfortable that they're operating in as secure an environment as possible. Cami.
Can I ask you about the Cape Ray, now that the Italians have named a port
Yes.
for the transfer? Has the captain of the Cape Ray gotten his orders yet? Does he know where he's going? Does he know when he's leaving?
Yeah, progress on getting the Cape Ray on her way is on schedule. She's completed 2 successful sea trials. They were able to test the hydrolysis machines in various sea states. So we have a pretty good idea that even under some heightened sea conditions, they'll be able to operate the machinery. They're still certifying the ship and the equipment, but again, that's all working right on schedule. We expect the certifications to be complete, if not today, certainly by tomorrow. On sailing dates, I can't give you an exact date right now, but we know we're drawing close, probably within the next week or so. I did see the Italian announcement on the port for transshipment. We're grateful for the Italians in being able to offer that up. But as for exact locations as to where the hydrolysis will occur, we haven't made those decisions right now. Well, let me go to Phil.
I just want to bring you back to the Air Force announcement yesterday for a second. The Secretary, in your statement, the Secretary was very concerned this was a top priority, but I didn't get the sense that he was maybe thinking about hanging the threat of job security over anyone over this incident or over recent incidents.
Yeah.
And again, this can't be taken in isolation. There was another incident involving General Kerry just very recently. So is this about a single, is the Secretary worried this is part of a trend, this is part of a bigger issue, and then maybe it's time to send a message about accountability?
I think the Secretary shares Secretary James's concern, as well as General Walsh's, about the scope and the size of this, and that there could be something larger afoot here. And I think they made it clear yesterday. He made it clear in his discussion with her that he wants this taken very, very seriously. And on accountability, I mean, this department traditionally holds people accountable when there's a need to hold them accountable, and I think Secretary Hagel will do that. But I don't think we're at that point right now. This just got kicked. We just literally he got briefed on it yesterday. They came to the podium. I mean, this just got started. We need to let it go where it's going to go. And I think that was the other point that he also made, was let the investigation take you where it may, let the facts take you where they may, and then we'll deal with accountability on the backside of it.
On the same topic, was the Secretary ever told how the drug part of this got started, which led to the other
Yes.
investigation? How did it begin?
Well, again, I'm not an expert on this. I'd really refer you to the Air Force. But he had been made aware while he was at F.E. Warren last week that two officers, at the time it was two, had been implicated in a narcotics investigation. Now, I think that was pretty much the extent of his knowledge that day. Secretary James briefed him up on the extent of that investigation and how that investigation led to this investigation. I think General Walsh mentioned that to you yesterday, that some of it had to do with electronic communication between Air Force members that kind of opened up a lid on this cheating problem. So he's aware of all that. He's aware of all that.
Was he told anything between the time he first learned about it on Thursday when he was at Warren, that there was a drug investigation, and apparently Sunday when Secretary James said they apparently became aware that there was a cheating problem, those few days, was the Secretary ever told that there was anything else afoot?
My understanding is he was first briefed about the broadening and the second broader investigation on the cheating when he met with Secretary James yesterday. Yeah, that's my understanding. Dan.
On the same subject, would the Secretary and would the leadership of the Pentagon also look at the need to perhaps pay the missile crews more to somehow, there's always this question about morale problems. Right. Does there need to be some kind of compensation looked at to somehow address the morale problems? And then I have a second question.
The Secretary actually, when we were there in a launch control center, we were talking to two young officers there, missileers, and he asked them that question, how much would incentives, one way or the other, whether it's educational incentives or financial incentives, affect your ability to be recruited into this force or to stay in this force? And they acknowledge that it's something that they talk about in the force, the potential value of incentives. But they also said that they take great pride in what they do, and they weren't sure whether incentives would make that much of a difference. I think what he indicated, though, that he's willing to think about that. He didn't make any decisions, he didn't make any promises, but he expressed that he's willing to look at that. He considers the ICBM force that important, that leg of the triad, that vital, and he's not going to close any doors. He's going to try to keep as many options open as he can as he looks at the future of the force and to keeping it vital and strong. So he's open to considering the potential for some incentives.
And then would he also review even the necessity of the entire triad as it stands, because there are people who say it's so necessary to have such a large land-based ICBM force in this day and age, given the capabilities of submarines and so on and so on.
Secretary Hagel is committed to the nuclear triad. Tony?
In its current size and
He's committed to the nuclear triad, but he's also said, and I think he said this last week, that it's we're entering an era of declining budgets. So the force is going, the entire military force is going to have to get smaller in some ways. He's also been, long before he was Secretary of Defense, an advocate of nuclear stockpile reductions. And he made specific mention of the New START Treaty when he was out there and his support for that, which, of course, is espousing reductions. So he's in favor of reductions across the nuclear enterprise, but he's also very much in favor of modernizing and making sure that we stay as superior from a technological standpoint. So to that degree, he believes in a very healthy, strong nuclear triad. But healthy and strong doesn't mean it has to be the exact same size it is today. Does that answer your question? Okay.
I want to move from nukes to the Navy quick. What was the rationale behind the guidance to the Navy to reduce the littoral combat ship program from 52 to 32? Did it have much to do with budget or concern about the configuration, mission, and the survivability of the vessel?
Well, Tony, you know, the Secretary visited USS Freedom when it was out in Singapore. He understands the importance of the value, the capabilities that small combatants can bring to the United States Navy and for the Navy of the future. But I am not going to speculate about a budget that hasn't been submitted or decisions that haven't been made about a budget that hasn't been submitted. So I'm just, I've seen the press reports that you're referring to, and I'm simply not going to speculate about that. I'm not going to talk about a budget that hasn't been submitted or decisions, quite frankly, that haven't been finally made.
Another Navy subject. Back last month, the Pentagon's test office sent to Mr. Hagel a memo saying that it's unlikely that the CVN-78, the most expensive warship ever built, is unlikely to meet its sortie generation rate or the rate at which it launches and lands airplanes. What was his reaction to that stark conclusion?
Well, he's grateful to the work that DOT&E did on looking at the capabilities of the Ford class. He's also well aware that, like every first ship in a class, there are issues you have to work through. This is hard stuff, and this is the first new class of aircraft carrier we've built in decades. It's also it's a stunning ship that will espouse great capabilities for the Navy that we just don't have right now. He's aware that there are challenges with that. He's grateful for the work that they did, and he's confident. He's talked to Secretary Mabus about this, and he's confident that the Navy's going to work through those challenges and that we're going to deliver a great ship. Yeah, I already got you. Yes, sir.
On Okinawa, there's an election coming up this weekend. Are you worried the results of the election might derail the agreement between U.S. and Japan?
I'm not going to venture into politics on Okinawa. What I'll tell you is we're grateful that the governor was able to sign that landfill permit there over the holidays, and that we could start to actually move dirt here on this new facility. We're grateful for that support, and we look forward to working with them as we continue to build it. Yes, sir.
Back to the budget, you mentioned earlier the meeting. What type of time frame is the department looking at right now in terms of a budget release? It's pretty late in the process, and you mentioned the budget's still not finalized.
Well, we're in much better shape than we were last year in terms of timing. I mean, OMB determines the schedule here, and I'm not going to get ahead of OMB. We're working very, very hard on that. To Tom's question, it's not complete, but it's certainly near complete. We're closing in on it very, very soon, weeks. But I wouldn't get into specifics. That's really for OMB to talk about, and they're the ones that submit it.
How likely is it going to be released the day after the Super Bowl? February 3rd or 2nd, I think it is.
I'm not going to speculate on exact dates here, Tony. OMB determines the schedule for the submission of the budget, and I think I'd refer you to OMB on this. Super Bowl. Jen?
I'd like to go back to videos. What was the Secretary's response to the Marine video of burning the corpses? Is there any alternate explanation for what those Marines were doing to those corpses? Any excuse for why they were burning corpses, and any indication that the pictures or video is fake?
Well, it's photographs as far as I know, not video. The secretary has seen has seen the images. He's deeply troubled by what he saw, no question about that. He's supportive of what the Marine Corps is doing in terms of investigating that. I can't sit here today and tell you with great certainty that they or confirm the veracity of the images. In other words, that the authenticity of them. But certainly they're disturbing images. They're not indicative, regardless of the kind of conduct and professionalism that the men and women of this department espouse and live every day. If they're proven to be accurate and authentic, we'll then march down the road of what needs to be done from an accountability perspective. Both the desecration of a corpse and photographing corpses are both violations of General Order 1B. But again, we have to let the investigation the Marine Corps just started get underway and authenticate these before we can make any accountability decisions. But he's been very clear with the Navy Department. He wants this taken seriously. He believes they are taking it seriously, and he expects them to keep him updated.
Admiral, on that point, the TMZ, who broke the story, are they cooperating with the investigation? Because they've provided blurred faces, which is obviously a big part of the investigation. They would know where they got them from. Is this organization cooperating?
I don't know. You'd really talk to the Marine Corps about that. I don't know. David?
I thought burning of corpses was permissible, depending on the situation. If you come into a compound which is filled with bodies that have been there for some time, and you're trying to occupy the compound, then you have to get rid of the corpses somehow.
Desecration is a violation of General Order 1B. On your specific question on burning, I think we need to let the investigation determine what happened here, and if it is true that Marines burned a corpse, why they burned that corpse. We got to let the investigation work that out.
Reasons for burning a corpse.
My understanding is desecration of corpses is a violation of General 1B. I'm not an expert on.
Burning a corpse, desecration.
I'll get back to you on that. I don't have the exact chapter and verse on burning of corpses. But look, let's not lose sight of the big issue here. I mean, that's not, aside from the burning, there were other images in that collection which are troubling for other reasons. So we need to let the Marine Corps take a look at this, authenticate it, see if it's real, if it happened, and then take it from there. John.
The Air Force recently announced that another dozen F-22s are going to deploy to Japan this month. Is this at all directly related to the tensions in the East China Sea? And when was this deployment decision made?
I have to refer you to the Air Force on the decision timing. I don't have that for you today. But the movements that you're seeing towards the Asia Pacific to include this are really more a focus of our rebalance to the Asia Pacific. We've been saying for a long time we're going to flow more resources, more capabilities to that part of the world, and I think that's what this is about.
Do you have an update on airlift operations to the Central African Republic?
I do, actually. If you just give me a second here.
Hey, sir, while you're flipping that, I think we get time for one after this one.
Okay. So we began today passenger movements for Rwandan forces from Kigali, Rwanda to Bangui. 2 C-17s, Air Force C-17s, transported about 70 Rwandan forces with some vehicles and 11 pallets of equipment. We expect the whole effort to move this Rwandan infantry battalion to take about 3 weeks. Totaling roughly 800 soldiers, about 70 vehicles, and a number of containers of life support supplies, personnel, equipment. Okay, and that started today. Take about 3 weeks to work it all out. I think total flights is like 35. I think that's 35 total C-17 flights is what they're talking about for this mission. David, did you have a question? Okay, I think I got time for one more. Bob.
Admiral, there's been a number of military aircraft crashes just in the last several days, including one today, I believe. And there was one, a real bad one off UK several days ago. Just wondering whether you see any connection between any of them. Is there any concern about a trend or to just coincidental.
We're always worried about aircraft mishaps and certainly folks losing their lives and limbs to these things. Our hearts go out to the hearts and thoughts and prayers go out to the families. No, I don't think we're seeing any trends between these. These are just tragic mishaps, but they're all investigated, and certainly if there are trends or strings you can pull between them, I mean, those will be pretty self-evident. I'm not aware of any right now. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.